Originally, I wanted to have the Chrono Trigger review ready for today, but Nintendo ended up sending us a copy of Star Fox Zero early, a review copy of the game. So we decided to focus on that and got that up last week, a couple of days before the game came out. And so I've had to push back the release date here for the Chrono Trigger review by a couple of weeks. However, I am going to be doing a live stream of Chrono Trigger tomorrow. So if you're interested in joining, I'm going to try to get through a significant portion of the game. I might even be able to finish it if I go quickly tomorrow. So join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, right here on the channel on YouTube. And I'll be doing a live stream of Chrono Trigger with Case and enlighten as well. So I wanted to do a discussion video on Chrono Trigger. And the way I've handled this in the past, for Final Fantasy X and for Xenoblade Chronicles X, was that I came out and I said or expressed a bunch of either concerns or complaints or gave some criticisms about the games in hopes that you guys would then respond and give me a different perspective, something else to think about, so that I'd be able to get a greater appreciation for the game. And I'm not sure if I've emphasized this enough in the past. Those videos are created in order to engage in conversation. They are not meant to be taken as a definitive final position. My entire reason for making those videos is so that you guys will respond to what is often widely expressed criticism about these games, things that a lot of people say about it, in order to get you guys to dispute those things and give me some perspective so that I can come to a better understanding of the game. I think that a lot of people are taking those videos as if those are my final definitive feelings about the games, and that's not true at all. It's meant to be an open discussion, and the same can be said here. This is not meant for me to make complaints about the game. It's meant for me to express certain things that either I or others have expressed that they don't like about something, so that you guys who do like it can give me your perspective and I can consider all of that before making the review. That being said, this game's a little different because I've said this many times over the years. Chrono Trigger is my absolute favorite game of all time. To me, it is as near perfect a game as you can find. I have a very hard time finding anything in this game to complain about. There's almost nothing I don't like about it. And so, because I feel that way, I think I'm going to do this in the reverse order of the way I usually do it. I'm going to sit here and just throw praise all over this game, and I want those of you who maybe don't have the same opinion of it, who don't think it's the greatest thing of all time, who maybe have some criticisms of the game, to give me those instead, so that I can consider those things and in the review try to remain as fair and balanced and as critically minded as I have been for all the Final Fantasy games I've reviewed. So let's just jump right in. Chrono Trigger, to me, is virtually flawless. And the one thing that I think makes it stand out, that makes it rise above a lot of the other JRPGs that came out around the same time, whether it was on the SNES that preceded it, games like Final Fantasy VI, or the ones that came after, like Final Fantasy VII. The thing that stands out to me is that there are no random battles. And random battles, even since I very first started playing JRPGs, was the one thing about them that always drove me crazy. There was something about wanting to explore an area, just get a feel for the space, check for treasure, check for secret areas, and having that constantly interrupted by battles that I wasn't necessarily interested in engaging in at the time was an aspect of the genre that I strongly disliked from the very beginning. I've never liked random battles. And I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who likes random battles, but probably a lot of people who, they're indifferent to it or can tolerate it or whatever. I've never felt that way. I've always hated random battles. So Chrono Trigger really stood out to me because you can avoid fights for the most part if you want to. There are a few places, obviously, where you're going to get ambushed. A couple of different areas in particular that I can think of off the top of my head where as soon as you step into a certain area, you're going to get attacked from enemies you can't see on the screen. But for the most part, you can see the enemies on screen and you can find clever ways to get around them and not have to fight if you don't want to. And I absolutely love that about this game. It is, to me, such an amazing improvement over the traditional random battle sort of mechanic that I'm able to forgive some of the things this game does that maybe were simplified in comparison to Final Fantasy VI. And I made these complaints when I made the Final Fantasy VII review, talking about how you can only have one weapon, one piece of armor, and one accessory per character. There's only basically 3 pieces of equipment you can have on any character at once. This game is kind of simple like that. Not quite as simple. There is a 4th additional piece of equipment in Chrono Trigger. So you have your weapon, 2 pieces of armor, a head and a chest piece, and then your accessory. However, this game does only allow for 3 characters in the active party at once. So it's interesting to me that those things bothered me in Final Fantasy VII, that you can only have 3 members in the party, that, there's only 3 pieces of equipment, in comparison to 6, where you have 2 weapon slots, one for the right and left hand, a headpiece and a chest piece for armor, and then 2 accessories, which were called relics in that game. So you had up to 6 pieces of equipment per character in Final Fantasy VI. You had 4 pieces of equipment per character for Chrono Trigger, and then only 3 per character in Final Fantasy VII. So it seemed that they kind of reached this peak in both Final Fantasy V and VI, where they had, a lot of different options, a lot of equipment, and a lot of strategy that could be employed there with so many different slots, that really kind of got dumbed down, both with Chrono Trigger and then with Final Fantasy VII especially. However, in this game, it doesn't seem to bother me. It didn't feel like it was limited in the same way. It's not something I actively thought about when I played it. I noticed it this time only because I had done the Final Fantasy reviews at this point, and I was like, this game only has, 4 slots for equipment. I wonder how that's gonna play into my enjoyment of it on this run. And I don't know, it just doesn't seem like something that significantly changes too much about the strategy of the game. Whereas for Final Fantasy VII, I felt like I was always just equipping the best weapon I had in terms of physical damage. I was always equipping the best piece of armor I had in terms of physical defense. In this game, there was a little bit more strategy involved in it still. You'd still not go for necessarily the quote-unquote best piece of equipment you had in order to have elemental protection or to have status effect protection or to have a certain element on your weapon. There seemed to be a lot more strategy in that way in Chrono Trigger than there is in Final Fantasy VII, in my experience, as I'm playing it through this time, and even remembering back to when I played it through the first time. It seems like the strategy is still there. It might not be quite as strong as it was in Final Fantasy VI, but it is still there, and so that's probably why that doesn't bother me too much. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, though. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but it does seem to me like Chrono Trigger still has good strategy involved with its equipment setups, especially in comparison to Final Fantasy VII, but maybe not quite as much as there was in Final Fantasy VI. The story, though, the presentation as a whole, the story, the music, the characters, is all just so brilliant in this game. And one thing I love about it is that it's not trying to be super complex like a lot of the Final Fantasy stories are. I think this actually came out right before Square started to go that route with a lot of their stories, especially in the Final Fantasy series. That kind of started with 7, where they tried to make this really complex, like weaving plot, where they left a lot of things open for interpretation. 8 took that one step further. It seems that 10 took it 2 steps further. So if you're into that kind of story where, you know, you get a sense that it's going one way at the beginning, but then there are these big, you know, twists and turns throughout that kind of really change everything. If you're into that kind of story, then Chrono Trigger might not be one of your favorites. I, however, am really, really okay with a story being more straightforward, and with it being a little simpler. Not because I don't enjoy complex stories. Of course I do, and I enjoy trying to dissect them and, you know, analyze them and all of that. But I think there's also a lot of value in a story that is well constructed and that makes sense and that you understand what's going on and you don't have to sit there and scratch your head or, you know, talk to obscure NPCs in order to get certain things filled in for you. I think that sometimes Square tries so hard to appear like it has depth in its storytelling. Not saying it doesn't have depth. I mean, these stories obviously do. Final Fantasy X has a lot of depth. 7 has a lot of depth. 8 has a lot of depth to its story. Even 9, towards the end, throws in a lot of stuff that really kind of changes it up, and it gets pretty complicated. And those stories have a lot of depth. And when you think about them, they all make sense. And with the Ultimania guides, you know, filling in even more of those blanks, there's really a lot to enjoy there. However, I really do feel like people tend to undervalue stories like Chrono Trigger that are more straightforward. And I really feel like doing that well is more enjoyable for me than weaving in a bunch of complexities that make the game difficult to understand without requiring either multiple playthroughs or requiring you to talk to other people about the game or requiring you to read something out of an Ultimania guide. And for that reason, Chrono Trigger's story appeals a heck of a lot more to me than a lot of the Final Fantasy stories do. And that's saying a lot because I really like the Final Fantasy stories. I really, really like Final Fantasy. Obviously, I've created a whole channel based around me analyzing Final Fantasy games. But Chrono Trigger is just on another level in every way to me from Final Fantasy. And really, it comes down to those two things. One, no pretentiousness, no, I guess, strong attempt to make the story feel like it has all this depth to it. It's not trying so hard at any of that. It's just, it is what it is. It's enjoyable and fun, and it makes sense all the time, and it's really well presented, and it's very strong, and it's got good themes that are very clear, and I really like that. I really like that about this game. And then on top of that, not having random battles, being able to explore freely for the most part and avoid battles when you want to, but then go back and fight when you want to fight and level up. Those two things, I think, more so than anything else in the game, really set it apart and are the reasons why I would say that I like this game better than Final Fantasy, for instance. The other thing that puts this game on another level for me, and this isn't quite as true for the DS version of the game, but for the SNES version of the game, all of the side content in this game, for the most part, all the side quests are really good at giving background and development to the characters. There's not really much there that's just meant to be a fun distraction from the main game. And I really like that as well. The result of that is that this game is quite a bit shorter than most other RPGs of its time, but I'm also really happy with that. I don't like when a game takes more than 50 hours to beat. And you can beat Final Fantasy games in less time than that, for sure. But if you're really getting involved and you're really looking for, the best equipment and to get like the most out of the experience, older Final Fantasy games would run up to the 40 or 50 hour mark. And some of the more modern Final Fantasy games are much longer than that. So I don't like it when you can't just experience most of what there is in the game, get through it, and be done with it in about the 25 to 30 hour mark. That's the sweet spot for me. When you go much beyond that, to me, it's like and this might be because I'm getting older now and I just don't have that kind of time, but I don't remember ever really having that kind of time to where I could get through a game, in a week or two, generally. It usually would take me much, much, much longer. It would, I'd have to play a game for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, sometimes even longer than that to get through it. Some of these older RPGs, because I just didn't have that kind of time. And when an experience is broken up to many, many, many short play sessions over longer periods of time, I just don't get quite as immersed in it as when I can sit down, and really, really get through something a little bit more quickly than that. I hope that makes sense. But Chrono Trigger is that way. It's much shorter. And another thing I love about that is that this game pioneered New Game Plus. It's not that it was the first game ever to have what's called today New Game Plus, where you could start the game over and play it again with your same levels and all that stuff. It wasn't the first game to do that. I'm not sure what that is. But I believe that Chrono Trigger was the first game to call that New Game Plus. It was the first time I had ever heard the phrase or the term New Game Plus. I believe that Chrono Trigger coined that term. And what's so cool about it is that you can go back through the game when you're done, because you can beat it relatively quickly, and you can experience all these different endings. And that's a really great way to add tons of replay value to something. And I don't know. I feel like the game sits at exactly the right length of time to complete it. At least in my opinion. It hits that sweet spot for me, where you can beat it relatively quickly. I mean, it doesn't feel short, but you can beat it much more quickly than the typical JRPG of that era. And then you can go back through it again and experience stuff, or do some things a little differently than you did the first time, unlock some new endings, and it's just perfect in that regard to me. Totally perfect. And it's another reason why it sits above some of the other Final Fantasy games for me, and why it separates itself and is more appealing to me than most of the other Final Fantasy games. Now, the DS version, like I was saying, does add in some other side content that doesn't do that as much. So that, what I just said, doesn't apply as much to the DS version as it does to the original version. But even for the DS version's additions, you don't have to do them, but you do get some pretty good equipment for some of the new side quests that they add. So here's some criticisms, I guess, I could throw out there. I want to get you guys, I want to get your thoughts on this stuff too. But one is, I'm not a big Ted Woolsey fan. I've said that a couple of times in the past. I know a lot of people are really, they have an attachment to his translations back on the Super Nintendo. I'm not a big fan of him. I think he's really quirky, and I think he likes to do a lot of kind of meta, wall-breaking references to, real-world things. For example, I know that he wanted to name, I don't know if it was an enemy or a boss in Super Mario RPG. He wanted to name it James Bomb. Like, he likes to do stuff like that for me is, it breaks immersion a bit. In this game in particular, I really don't like, and by this I mean the Super Nintendo version of Chrono Trigger, I don't like the way Frog speaks. And a lot of people are probably going to jump on me for that, because a lot of people really love the way he talked in the Super Nintendo version of the game. His early modern English mode of speech, which, is around the time of Shakespeare, so kind of like his Shakespearean English, or, if you read the King James Bible, he's supposed to kind of sound like he's speaking in that mode of speech, which would be fine, considering that, for us, that was about 400 years ago that people spoke that way in English-speaking countries. And in Chrono Trigger, Frog comes from a time that's 400 years before Chrono's time. So it would make sense if the people in his past spoke that way. However, Frog is literally the only person in that time period who speaks like that. Nobody else does. If everybody else spoke like that, I'd be more okay with it. But the other problem is that it isn't written correctly. He uses thee and thy and thou, and his way of writing in that mode is mostly incorrect. It doesn't sound right. It's not grammatically correct for early modern English, and that bothers me quite a bit too. The first version of Chrono Trigger that I actually played all the way through was the DS version. So in that version, they've changed the way that Frog speaks, but also the way that all of the people from 600 AD speak. And it all matches together, so it makes a lot more sense. It gels. They have a little bit more of an elevated mode of speech, which again feels, a little bit more ancient maybe, and kind of fits better. But in the Super Nintendo version, that's not how it is. So the script and the dialogue from the DS version, I feel, is really, really phenomenal. And that was, the first version of the game that I actually finished. So in that version, I would say that the writing is spectacular. But in the Super Nintendo version, it's not quite as good. And it really does bother me that Frog speaks the way he does, and which is so different from all of the other people in the same time period that he comes from. There's also one specific plot point that kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me. Again, for any of you who haven't played Chrono Trigger and don't want something spoiled, this is kind of a late game sort of thing. It's not like a huge spoiler, but if you don't want anything spoiled, then, click away. But there's a part where Shala and Janice come down to talk or to warn the main party of something that's going to happen. And then Dalton, one of the Queen's generals, comes in and basically captures Shala and takes her away. The scene is a little bit awkward to me because he comes up and grabs Shala and says to Chrono, who pulls his sword out, like, "Don't move or I'll kill her," or whatever. Which makes no sense because he needs her. They need her in the Ocean Palace in order to accomplish their goal. So he says, "We have to have you," Shala, when he walks in, "we need you in order to, do what we're trying to do." Then he runs up and puts a knife to her throat and threatens the party as if like, "Oh, if you move, I'll kill her." It's like, no, you won't. You can't do this without her. So that exchange, at least in the Super Nintendo version, is a little bit awkward. I haven't seen it in a while in the DS version. I don't know if they've made it, make a little more sense. But, all they would have had to have done is have Dalton grab Janice instead and threaten Shala and say, "I will kill Janice," who the Queen really doesn't care about. And, he's kind of like he's a weird kid. And not a lot of people like him very much. But Shala and Janice have kind of a special relationship. So if he had ran up to Janice, grabbed him by the throat and put a knife to his throat, that would have made that scene feel a lot better to me than, saying, "We have to have you alive." Then he threatens to kill her in order to stop the party from attacking him. It just doesn't make sense. That's the one part of the story that kind of stuck out a little bit. And I was like, that's not really the best. But other than that, I love the storyline in this game. The music is just, it's, in my opinion, the best soundtrack in any video game of all time. I absolutely love the fact that you can travel back in time or forward in time and see how the topography, the geography of the world changes slightly. I just felt like that was so brilliant and so immersive and such like a cool concept of being able to visit the world during different eras, different time periods of its development and seeing how the world changed. Being able to go back in time, and if you open a chest back in time, then that chest won't be full in a future time period. They were very particular about those kinds of details, And if you change one little thing in the past, it changes a whole bunch of stuff in the future. And they had puzzles that involved that. And I don't know, man. It's just so incredibly well made. The game, to me, is a masterpiece that's almost unrivaled by any other game that exists. It's my favorite game of all time. I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. But there's very little there that I feel like I can criticize besides the few things I've gone over here in the video. But I want to get your thoughts. I want you guys to tell me why I'm wrong if you feel like I am, and help me understand it from a different perspective, because one thing I don't want to do is come in here and just praise the game to no end and apply no critical analysis to it and, come off as being unfair or, too biased or something like that. So give me your thoughts in the comments. I want to have a discussion about this. So thanks everybody for watching. You guys are so awesome. I love talking to my viewers about these games. I think that we've developed a little community here of some of just the most intelligent thinkers that I've met in any kind of gaming circle or community. It's just really enlightening to talk to you guys. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Mountain Time to stream Chrono Trigger, and hopefully I'll be able to get, if not all the way through the game, through a significant portion to where I'm at kind of the late game stage. So see you guys then.